Once again, this is your brother Farouk Hunter. How are you doing? As always, I started everything out by saying Assalamu alaikum, uhuru, hello, and all other welcomes and invites that our people receive. Today we have a heck of a show ahead of us, and it's something that I've been waiting for a long time to give to you. Bum bum ba-dum. I am talking about the Freedom Plan. Let's get into it. So now we're talking about the Freedom Plan, and this is the plan for freedom at Freedom Nation and Freedom Village. I mean, it's great to have an event. We are always talking about how we're getting rid of things like the black tax, like the black tax. We're getting rid of things like any kind of inhibitions that hold us back from having absolute and true power and self-determination over our own lives. That's important. That's important. Now, another day, we've got more deep into the ideas behind the Freedom Nation and the Freedom Village, why we exist. We talk about the different events of the world, geopolitical things that are happening that are leading us down a certain path. But today, I want to talk about the plan. And specifically, I want to talk about the Freedom Plan and the plan for freedom. That is the thing that we must do in order to make the black-owned town a reality, right? So we have a lot of people out there talking about black-owned town when there were things happening and when disruption was obvious during riots and other stuff during the Trumpy areas. But the reality is that you have to have a realistic plan and realistic resources to get things done. And we are a group that is based on implementation. We are here to make the black-owned town a reality in modern history, and also to make it a very modern and advanced space. That takes some real planning and some real thinking, and that's where I introduce the Freedom Plan. And this is the plan for freedom, for your freedom. Remember, our definition of freedom here is the ability to do the things that you need to do in your life and you want to do without the inhibition of others. It stops there. It's just about that clear. So getting right into it, we've got this beautiful presentation to give you, and I want to go ahead and start with this presentation and start walking it through. It's going to take a couple of videos to cover this, and I want to be mindful of the amount of time that we're taking up in order to do this, because I want you to be able to go back and listen to and go through this in the proper chunks so that you can really receive what it is. So the first thing we're going to do today is we're just going to cover the basic structure of the plan and exactly why it exists. And we're also going to cover how the plan meets the standards and regimen that any city would have to do, whether you're a big city like Atlanta or like New York, or you're a very small town. Having city planning and economic planning is something every city, every country must do. It drives everything. It drives the educational systems, it drives the politics, it drives the lifestyle. Everything is driven by having this economic plan and planning a city that can meet those economic needs. And today we have the Freedom Plan that's going to do that. So let's jump right into it, jump over, and let's talk about something called the circular flow. Now, circular flow, we'll get into it more. We'll talk about it more, about the plan, but it is definitely the core of the Freedom Plan. Circular flow, we're going to go more into. I've got some videos because sometimes it's hard to understand this. And sometimes when we talk to each other, we don't always understand where we might be coming from. So I thought I would elicit the assistance of some different resources in order to talk about the circular flow and for us to learn about it even more. So we're going to advance here and start a slide. And by the way, all the slides that are here, everything I'm going through is going to be made available to you only if you're a citizen. This is a reminder that you want to go to Freedom Nation. Let's remember again, freedomnation.me. freedomnation.me. Let's take a second to throw that up here. Let me go back to our main screen. I'm going to take a second just to put that up here to make sure that you can get it. And it is Freedom Nation, freedomnation.me freedomnation.me/apply. That's how we get there. And if you want to put the HTTPS in front of it, you can. Let's make that small enough for you to actually see it. That would be helpful, right? And then we're going to, let's make it bold so we can see it nice and pretty and everything else. I don't usually do this in the middle of a presentation, but I want to make sure something small I forgot to do, and it's there now. And I want you to be able to go there. That's Freedom Nation. Let's read from this way, freedomnation.me/apply, right? You can put www if you want to, but it's still freedomnation.me/apply. So everything that we talk about today, the entire plan is available to every Freedom citizen. And as long as you can go through Pass Citizen and become a Freedom citizen, then you will have access to this plan. All right, let's jump into it right away. Going back into the circular flow. So like I said, let's use a couple of different examples for the circular flow. I have one that's really cool. I like it, and it explains it. So let's listen to it.
Hey, this is Jacob Clifford. Welcome to ACDC Econ. Today I'm going to show you something that's all around you that most people don't even see. It's called the Matrix, and you're inside it right now. The circular flow matrix, or model, shows how products, resources, and money flow in the economy. Now, look at your surroundings. Seriously, take a moment and look around you. The matrix is everywhere.
It is all around us, even now in this very room.
In a market economy, there's households, which is just people like you and me, and there's also businesses. Now, businesses sell goods and services to the households in something called the product market. It's not like just one place. It's anywhere things are sold, like online or the mall or the street corner, anywhere you can buy stuff. The computer or phone in front of you right now is a great example. I mean, you didn't produce that. A business did, and they sold it to you in the product market. The same thing applies to your chair or pencil or the book over there, everything around you. But to make those goods and services, businesses need resources like workers and machines. In the free market, households own the resources and they're sold to the businesses in the resource market. Economists point out that there's 4 categories of resources, or 4 factors of production. The first one is land, which is any natural resource or anything that comes from Mother Nature. Then there's labor, then capital, which is tools and machines, and finally, someone to bring it all together, the entrepreneur. That's why it's called the circular flow matrix. Those resources are being used by the business to produce the products that people turn around and go buy. Now, what about money? Well, it goes the other direction. When you buy your phone in the product market, you had to pay them money. That's called consumer spending. Now, that money makes its way to the businesses, and they call it revenue. But the business doesn't get to keep all that money. They've got to pay for resources, and that's called the cost of production. It's being paid to engineers that develop the phone. Those engineers earned income. Economists break down income into 4 different types that go along with each of the 4 factors of production. They're called factor payments. When you sell land, you earn rent. When you sell labor, you earn wages. For capital, you get interest. And for entrepreneurship, you get profit. So this is it, the circular flow matrix that shows how a market economy works. Whoa. Now, let me ask you a few questions to see if you really understand the matrix. First question, is your local mall an example of the product market or the resource market? It's both. Some people are there to buy products in the product market, but there's some people who are working or trying to get a job, and that's a resource market. So products, resources, and money are all being exchanged. Okay, next question. Do businesses demand or supply? The answer is both. They demand in the resource market, but they supply in the product market. Households, on the other hand, demand in the product market, and they supply in the resource market. So both businesses and households are supplying and demanding. So far, this model is showing the private sector with just households and businesses. But there's a bunch of important things missing, like national defense, schools, and roads. Those things aren't produced by businesses. So let's add in the government and the public sector. The size and role of the government in an economy depends on a country's economic system, but in most market economies, the government still plays a role. First, the government buys goods and services from businesses in the product market, for example, fire trucks. And just like households, they pay for them. That's called government spending. The government also buys resources in the resource market, like teachers and firefighters. Again, it pays for those resources, which is again called government spending. The government then turns around and provides public goods and services, like fire protection, schools, roads, and bridges, to businesses and households. The government also pays money to businesses called subsidies or households called welfare. Economists call those transfer payments. There are situations when the government's giving out money, but not for goods and services. It's to meet some other objective, like to alleviate poverty or get companies to produce more fuel-efficient cars. But how does the government afford to provide public goods and welfare and subsidies? Well, they tax businesses and households. Income taxes and sales taxes fund government projects and programs. Now, there's several things still missing from this matrix, including a financial sector where money isn't spent, it's saved and then loaned out, and also the role of other countries with exports and imports. But for now, this diagram gives you a pretty good idea of how a modern economy works. One final thought. In the movie, the matrix enslaves people.
You are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage.
Many people wonder if capitalism and this hamster wheel of constantly spending and earning and spending and earning enslaves people. Now, would your life be better off if you pulled a Thoreau and just lived out in the woods? I don't know, but what I do know is there's a lot of things you'd have to live without. First, there'd be no cell phones or computers, so say goodbye to YouTube. And also, there'd be no modern medicine or hospitals. It would be nice if none of us had to work, but there's a trade-off to that. So does the Matrix enslave us or liberate us? Let me know in the comments below, all right? Thanks for watching. Till next time.
So I love this video. I love it because it explains in detail exactly what the circular economy is and how economies work. And if you can see, look up inside the corner, I left it there at the end. They're talking about China. And they said, why is communist China doing so well? Now, this is before the United States started having initiatives where they spend $1.2 billion, which they are now, in order to create a situation where you hate China. They're literally paying for advertisements and education in the educational system to make you not want to be a part of China and other people in the world. But that being put to the side, I love it how he also mentioned that it's a matrix. And essentially within the matrix, you are being controlled. You are looked at as a battery, and you do look as yourself as part of a system that there is control inside that system. That's something that we should remember. And that's something that we should be mindful of as we think about freedom. Freedom is impossible inside of any system. Now, if you read the principles of freedom, one of the things that I think that is emphasized on is that how systems that have basic laws and structure, a basic security mechanism in place in order to maintain those laws, structure, and culture that do not agree with the people within it can be enslaved systems for the people who live in it. However, all systems have these control mechanisms. All systems have these economic constructs. And the Black-owned city is no different, except that the basic principles by which the city is founded, managed, run, are those that gel with you, the ones that make your life successful. This is why we have to create this space. So I love the idea of this, and I love the idea of circular economy. Now, when you think about the circular economy, and I'm going to get back to the China example, but what I want to do is I want to introduce another concept really quick. So let's look at the concept on the next thing. It's a term that some people are familiar with, some people aren't. It's called GDP. And I've got two wonderful little images here I'll explain later. But GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. What does it do? GDP is how we track that we are being successful as a society. It means that we are producing goods from the raw materials that live in that country or in that space. Whenever you have a closed environment, any kind of environment, right? Closed environment can be a country, closed environment can be a city, closed environment can be a state. But whenever you have a closed environment, there has a certain amount of resources within the environment. Those resources, those raw materials, are then accessed by labor. Labor will then refine those raw materials and basically produce them into something. So it either finishes them, refines them, or just basically processes them. But the concept of processing, so you process a tree into lumber. Example, you process clay into a brick. Example, you process silica oxide into glass. And the silica oxide doesn't have as much value as a raw material because it has no use to the system. It only has use when it becomes glass. And when it becomes glass, we pay a cost according to it because of the value that it represents in our life according to other things inside of our economy and the market price. So GDP is a very important measure for how countries, states, and cities, any kind of structure, any kind of environment actually grows. The GDP of the Freedom Nation is something that we've been tracking since day one. We include all of the tools that have been purchased. We include all of just absolutely everything. Any moment you can ask what the GDP is of the Freedom Nation, and we can tell you because we track everything, right? We've been doing this as a habit from day one because we understand that this is the way great cities and great countries are built. Now let's use the example of a China. Why China? Because when you have a GDP issue, when you are trying to raise your GDP, the thing you have to do is not raise it with debt. Now you can raise your GDP with debt by borrowing money to facilitate your people to work and then produce the raw materials up into something and then selling them back out. This is the concept of a second world nation, or a third world nation actually. This is the concept of a developing nation. This is more so the concept of colonialism and the mercantile system. The idea of colonizing cities and colonizing countries and then forcing people to produce and then ship it back out. It strips all the true value right up out of the place. If you want to have strong growth and you want to build an amazing city, you've got to have GDP that is retained inside the city that you're building in. China did this extremely well by closing off China in a semi-closed economy. What does that mean? That means that they took the things that they had and used them internally, refined them and built more while importing knowledge, importing money, and exporting goods in excess. Listen to what I said, in excess. It means that they took care of their own needs first, and then they shipped out everything that they did over what they could consume. This meant that the average person would grow in their status, to be raised from their economic base, as well as being able to bring an exponential flow of funds into the country that would allow it to be what it is today, which is superpower the world. I use an example here of the fictional city of Wakanda. Why? Because we just jailed with that, right? Wakanda has this little thing, if you watch the comic books, right, versus this no-growth city in the Wakanda called vibranium. Now, even the comic book people understand GDP and understand a circular economy and the basis of economy. They knew that in order to build even a fictional city, that it had to have the basis of something that it was exporting. What made Wakanda so wealthy is that it is a closed society. As a matter of fact, it's hidden behind a veil. You can't even see it, right? So it doesn't really want outside in. It takes everything that comes into it, everything that's from it, and use it to build up Wakanda itself, right? The Black Panther has, vibranium claws, and everyone is using all the technology that comes from the vibranium. But then in the excess they have, they sell it in small parts back out to the world, and it becomes extremely valuable to the rest of the world. And that's how they built up this additional wealth to come in. The Freedom Plan is exactly this. Literally, the Freedom Plan to the letter, the Freedom Plan is this. We are going to take and analyze what's internal and what we need. And we're going to look at the skill sets that we have amongst the citizens. And then from that skill set, we're going to then turn around and figure out how to provide us with what we need. And then secondarily, how to exponentially provide so that we increase the wealth of our cities so significantly that we become the new realized Wakanda. And this is a real plan, very real. And I'm going to go through another little bit of effort, showing you a second video. Same guy, later on, he's been co-opted a little bit, and they put him with a lady who's all super gun-ho, American system rocks, But they go into a little detail that I think is good. So let's jump in and let's go ahead and watch the second video that kind of explains more about the circular economy and more about our economic system and macroeconomics.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Hill.
And I'm Mr. Clifford, and welcome to Crash Course Economics.
Today we're going to focus on macroeconomics and talk about economic systems and the nations that really like them. Wink, wink.
Economic systems and the nations really like them. Wink, wink. What does that even mean?
I'm trying to come up with a spicy title for today's show. Okay, try this one on. How about economic systems and the nations that are attracted to them?
No.
Or when economic systems and nations hook up.
I don't even know what to say. Stan, roll the intro.
So So to pick up where we left off, we all have wants. Food, cell phones, a good education, the $10,000 gold Apple Watch. But like the Rolling Stones tell us, you can't always get what you want. We don't have an infinite amount of resources like raw materials, workers, and time. So we have to make choices. Speaking of, who likes this? I'm gonna go change shirts. I'm gonna make another choice. So this shirt, it's way better, right? Anyway, we as a social order have to figure out 3 things. Number 1, what to produce. Number 2, how to produce it. And number 3, who gets it. Answer these 3 questions, and you've got an economic system. There's a ton of backstory here about the history and evolution of economic thought. We'll get to that in a future video. In today's video, we're gonna chat about the world today. Let's take a look at 2 different economic systems, market economies and planned economies.
It all comes down to who owns and controls the factors of production. These are the major inputs required to produce stuff, and Karl Marx classified them as land, labor, and capital. He even wrote a book about it, Das Kapital. In a planned economy, the government controls the factors of production, and it's easy to assume that's the same thing as communism or socialism, but that's not quite right. According to Karl Marx, the theory of communism may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. So true communism is a classless society. When I say classless, I'm talking about a social order where everyone owns the factors of production and output is distributed equally. Kind of like China and Cuba and the former Soviet Union, except not at all. In practice, no country has ever truly been communist, but there's a lot of countries that are socialist. Often socialism has both private property and some public ownership and control of industry. The goal is to meet specific collective objectives and to provide free and equal access to things like education and healthcare. In both communism and socialism, there is economic planning, and the government, usually in the form of some bureaucratic agency, helps decide what to produce, how to produce it, and who gets it. Now, if an economy is completely controlled by the government, down to the number of shoes that should be produced, that's called a command economy.
On the other side of the spectrum, we have free market economies. In free market or capitalist economies, individuals own the factors of production, and the government keeps its nose out of the stuff and adopts a laissez-faire or hands-off approach to production, commerce, and trade. In free market economies, businesses make things like cars, not to do good for mankind, but because they want to make a profit. Since consumers, that's me and you, get to choose which car we want, car producers need to make a car with the right features at the right price. Economists call this the invisible hand.
Not by helping people. I'm fading out.
If consumers prefer one company's car, that business will make more profit and have an incentive to produce more cars. Car companies that don't offer the cars people want will disappear. Maybe you've heard of the DeLorean? It was a cool-looking car, but not a car that many people wanted to buy. Apparently, it was expensive, underpowered, and poorly made. And it didn't actually travel through time. Anyway, this concept applies to all other markets like cell phones or shoes. Scarce resources will go to the most desired use, and they'll be used efficiently. More or less. After all, if a business is wasteful and inefficient or makes something that no one wants to buy, then some other business will make a similar product that's either better or cheaper or both. If there's no consumer demand for a product, resources won't be wasted producing it. We often take markets for granted, but look at the alternative. Assume instead that a government agency was in charge of deciding exactly which types of cars and cell phones and shoes to make. Do you think they could quickly respond to changes in tastes and preferences? If there was only one government monopoly producing cars, do you think they'd be produced efficiently?
So the invisible hand of the free market is the idea that individuals and businesses meet society's needs when they seek their own self-interest.
No problem.
Competitive markets with profit-seeking businesses will have an incentive to produce high-quality products as efficiently as possible. In the words of Adam Smith, it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Now, it looks like the free market's perfect and we don't even need a government, but that's not quite right.
Remember, he says,
there's a bunch of things the government must do because free markets won't. First is maintain the rule of law. We need laws and police and contracts and courts to keep everything orderly. Second, we need public goods and services like roads and bridges and education and defense, because goods can't get to consumers if bridges are falling down, and consumers can't make good choices if they're not educated, and no one really cares about buying the new iPhone if there's a bomb dropping on your head. Third, the government sometimes needs to step in when markets get things wrong. But what does that even mean?
Well, let's go back to producing cars. The free market produces what we consumers want to buy, and when we buy, we're thinking about what a car looks like, if it's the color we want, maybe if it's safe, what it costs. Most of us aren't worried about air pollution. We don't think much about who made our car, what they were paid, what the conditions at the factory were like. That's when government steps in to regulate production. In a free market economy like the United States, you might think that the government doesn't tell car producers what types of cars to produce and how to produce them, except that it does. Cars need to meet strict emissions and safety standards, and there are laws dictating how much manufacturers can pollute and how workers should be treated. And here's the big takeaway. Modern economies are neither completely fully free market nor planned. There's a spectrum of government involvement. For example, on one end we have North Korea. They have a command economy where production is entirely controlled by the government. On the other end we have countries like New Zealand. They have private property, few taxes, and few regulations. In the middle we have the rest of the world. So most modern economies are actually mixed economies with both free markets and government intervention.
And a great way to explain a mixed economy is by looking at something called the circular flow model. Let's go to the thought level.
Explain
A
what we
modern
already
economy
did
is made
before,
up
but
of
the
households,
graphics are
which are
cooler,
individuals
so let's
like you
listen
and
to it
me,
again to drive
and
it.
businesses. Businesses sell goods and services to households in the product market. That's anywhere goods and services are bought and sold. The households need to pay for those goods and services, but where do they get the money? The households earn the money by selling their resources, like labor, to businesses. Now, this is done in the resource market. The businesses use the money they earn from selling products in the product market to pay for resources in the resource market. And households use the money they earned in the resource market to buy products in the product market. But there's another key player in the economy, the government. The government also buys products and resources. For example, they'll buy cars from businesses and hire government employees like policemen to drive them. The government pays for public goods like roads and bridges and public services like firefighters and teachers. They also provide transfer payments to individuals in poverty and subsidies to businesses to produce things like fuel-efficient cars. But where does the government get the money? Well, you get some of it from taxing households and businesses, and you get some of it from borrowing. But we'll talk about that later. So basically that's it. That's the circular flow of products, resources, and money, and the interactions between businesses, individuals, and the government. Now, it gets more complex when you add in international trade and the financial sector, but for now, the simplified circular flow shows how the modern economy works.
Thanks, Thought
I
Bubble.
like the matrix
We've established that
concept.
economies differ based on the amount of government involvement, but it's important to keep in mind that economies can change.
truthful.
Over time, Denmark and Canada have adopted more elements of a planned economy, like universal health care. China, on the other hand, has added more free market elements to its economy, and now has less government ownership and control of production. So communist China actually has a socialist market economy. But which type of economy is better? And how much should the government get involved? It's hard to find support for command economies outside North Korea. And maybe some nostalgic Cubans and Russians. Those who support socialism would point out Denmark's high standards of living and low income inequality, but free market enthusiasts might point out China's massive economic growth and growing middle class after backing away from central planning. Ultimately, the optimal amount of government involvement depends on your personal values. For example, what, if anything, do you think the government should do to help people in poverty? Do you think it's up to each individual to provide for themselves, come what may? Or do you think the government should step in as a safety net and help pay for food and health care? What if the person made choices that got them in financial trouble, like gambling, or made them sick, like smoking? Should society help then? Well, economists aren't really good at answering these types of questions. Sorry. It's not that they're heartless. It's just they don't operate in the realm of feelings. In the words of economist Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Sure, it would be great if we could end poverty or provide health care for everyone, but we're gonna have to give something up in order to do it. Forcing car producers to meet emissions and safety regulations will increase production costs and likely increase the price of cars. But it also reduces pollution and fossil fuel consumption, which will hopefully improve public health and save money in the long run. There is always an opportunity cost, and deciding if it's worth it, well, that's up to you and your elected officials. And a bunch of lobbyists. Deng Xiaoping transformed China from a country with debilitating poverty and famine to the economic powerhouse it is today. Regarding this debate, he said, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white. If it catches mice,
A lot of what
it's a good
she's doing
cat."
now is just trying to
Which makes me think
promote
about that green shirt. That was a
that
good shirt.
somehow
I'll
Adam
be right
Smith
back.
got it right.
So let's wrap this thing up.
We'll let him
In practice,
finish
almost
out
all
now.
countries are somewhere between the extremes of a command economy and a completely free market economy. That's because mixed economies seem best at handling the circular flow of goods, money, and resources. But the debate over free markets and government control will never end.
Well, actually, it will end when humanity ends, because microscopic organisms don't divide themselves into factions based on economic theory. But anyway, that's why it's vital for you to be informed about the merits and the limitations of economic systems and be willing to support solutions that get the job done as opposed to getting stuck in one ideology. Economic theories and models can seem really great in the abstract, but when they're kicked out into the real world and actually have to govern the affairs of billions of people, it turns out that some flexibility is a very important thing.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
All right. So really good. You know, I like the crash course pieces because they're pretty much straightforward. They in a couple minutes, they tell you a whole lot about the economy as it is. They cover some other topics, but that's neither here nor there. What you should have heard, and you should have heard really clear, is just basically how an economy works. This idea of free economy and planned economy, they're not really exclusive ideas. They're all mixed together. The Freedom Nation has to have an economic system. You cannot create a new city or new space if it's just us all moving into the woods and then just living in kumbaya. We have seen several initiatives over the years fail because they failed to create a strong economic system. Now, what we're going to do at the Freedom Nation is we're going to look towards a little more of a planned, closed economy with free economy elements so that the individuals maintain their freedom and their ability to sell their goods in the way they want to. But internally, we are going to talk to one another about creating exclusivity and creating a space where we can operate so that we hold as much of our earnings internal as possible. When you can hold your earnings internally and you can increase your GDP, you immediately grow a space exponentially. And that's just what China did. It's even what the United States did back even after World War II. World War II, the United States claimed to just have a free economy, but the reality is that after the war destroyed so much infrastructure around the world, it gave the U.S. the ability to use its manufacturing engine to then produce to the world in excess. Even the Brax-Hicks Agreement that makes the United States currency a standard bearing currency happened because of the stability of the U.S. after pretty much aiding to the destruction of the rest of the world, along with the Germans and so forth and so on. So every country that is in a weak position benefits from increasing its own manufacturing and production, consuming its own goods, and increasing its export of goods and import of knowledge. So let's get deeper into that and what that looks like for the Freedom Nation. So in order to do this, we have some basic structure of the plan. There are 4 key parts to this plan. One is to buy land. That's number 1. Because without the ability to have an environment that you can close off the benefits of your economic development, then essentially the pieces spill out everywhere, right? It's nice to have a conversation about having a virtual community, and we can be virtual, we can communicate. But when you want to reap the benefits of GDP, of gross domestic product, you have to have a controlled space. It can be multiple controlled spaces, 1 or 2 or 3, but they have to be fully controlled by you for you to be able to receive that. So buy land in the village. That's so important. Buying land in the village gives you your stake in the environment. Build your home. So put your life into the Freedom Village. That is phase 2 of the plan. Now we currently have 70 lots already sold in Freedom Village, Georgia 1, and Freedom Village, Georgia 2, which is just next door, is opening up in December for sales. You do not want to miss it, okay? Because we sold out all the property last time in both phase 1 and phase 2 in like 2 to 3 days. So our backlist for purchasing in phase 3 is already about 30 people deep, and we'll only have 150 lots to sell. And once they're gone, and people own those spots. There are people now working hard to build their home, and we're finding ways to invest in those individuals by giving them financing that's completely interest-free. We take out that horrible structure, and then we're building that up. The last one is to move to Freedom, the third one is to move to Freedom Village, right? So buy your land, build the house, move your body and your persons. Listen, building an economy is a physical thing. Even though we will talk very deeply about things like export, import, living abroad, so forth and so on. These are all parts of our plan. But the people, the citizens of Freedom Nation, have to live in the Freedom Villages in order to reap the full bill of benefits and to be able to operate on a daily basis and consume and produce for one another. Buy all you can from your fellow citizens. That's number 4. And we're going to help with number 4. This entire presentation is about number 4. Now, we're going to come to the end of this presentation in just a little while because I think we're going to cap it right around an hour. We might be about 35 minutes in so far, and I don't want to overload you. I want you to take a second to look at this video in its entirety and then receive and take in what you've heard so that it has value. These 4 steps of the plan, I don't want you to forget. And in those 4 steps, our goal now is to build 500 freedom families. Now, 500 families average household income of $100,000. Some make more, some make less. Some of our freedom citizens coming from California and New York are in places where they have to make more just to live. 3-bedroom house in California can go for $1 million. You have to make more. So the average income of $100,000 per household is $50 million in annual revenue. I want you to remember that number because we're going to slice it up into pieces and we're going to then use it. And if it sounds kind of rudimentary to you, we put together a little bit more to explain exactly how the U.S. actually slices their GDP development, tracks it, and puts it together. And then we're going to use the same tools and terms that they do in order to do that, from a country standpoint to a city standpoint, because right is right. Now, how freedom families spend their money. This is a little piece that came from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and U.S. Bureau of Labor, blah. I kind of messed that up. Either way, the way Americans typically spend their money, from people who earn anywhere between $30,000 a year all the way to $500,000 a year, is visualized on this graph. That's 29% to housing, that's 6% to personal care. And if you haven't noticed, the 3 most significant areas are food, cars, your automotive or your transportation overall, and your housing. This consumes well over 50%, almost 60% of your spend. In some cases, some people are spending 70% on these things alone, almost 80% if you include gas that's here and a couple other things, and eating out inside of your food budget. But just focusing on these areas: housing, personal care, savings, furniture, eating out, gas, utilities, cars, entertainment, emergency care, and groceries, because these are the things that the people in the Freedom Nation can do today. We have citizens that are capable, and we will bring on new citizens that are capable of doing more of this. And in that process of bringing on those citizens to do more, and by the way, suck this up. Look at this thing and look it over again. It's true. I want you to do your own bills, take a look at them, and I bet you don't come in that much different from this. But if we look at it, there's a certain percentage that we can do and a certain percentage we can't do. So we've taken 85% of this overall spend, around 80%, 85%, and we've thought, okay, let's work on pulling 85% of the spend into our internal closed environment. Let's try to do that by ourselves. That's not going to happen overnight. No way. But if we plan, if we focus, if we keep our commitments to one another and we act like a community, we will get there, and the benefit will be absolutely amazing. Everyone will be able to start a core business that then supports the community, or work for one of those core businesses, make a very good living, and pump the money back into the system. And as long as we do the same, we follow the example like the Black Wall Street had in Greenwood, where the money used to circle around 36 times before leaving. One of the reasons that we're so poor now, the average African American families overall total value, their overall value is about $17,000, whereas the average Caucasian family is about $171,000. They have 10 times more wealth than us because of how we circulate our spending. We're always having to buy from people who we don't know, who don't operate in our communities, and who don't put money back in our communities. And because of that lack of circulation, that's why we constantly are failing financially. And we don't have people who are next to us who care about us, love us, and love our children, who then can provide us with the resources that we will have to make our lives better. So taking the 85%, we've broken it up into these different factions: housing, grocery, education, utilities, blah, blah, blah. You can look down the list and you'll see it. We're going to go a lot deeper in a second video, but for this video, just know that it's there. These are the values, and this is where it's coming from. I want to kind of introduce you to something that you might know, you might not know, and this is the NAICS codes and SIC codes from the United States, our Department of Economy. So our economic departments, our Bureau of Economics inside the United States, we actually track, just like most countries do, track our economy according to a set of codes that break down everything just like you saw before. So you won't see a lot of difference between our breakdown and the breakdown that's used by the NAICS in the United States. And this is the North American Industry Classification System. And this tracks the overall input and output of every single industry to ensure that we have positive or negative GDP growth, to understand the flow of cash, and to understand exactly how our economy is doing so that we can make plans, and then we can also ensure that the country continues to do well. Whether it's doing well or not is up to your discretion. The U.S. Census Bureau of Economic Indicators also tracks things like monthly wholesale inventories, business formation statistics, selected service revenue, and so many other statistics that tell us how the country's doing. And you wonder, where is this information coming from? Where do we see this money? How do we know that this money is being spent? Well, it's because how you do your taxes. It's also how businesses do their taxes. It's also the monthly report, quarterly reporting that some businesses do. And then also there are other places where that data is gathered from. For us, we have a single portal called my.coastal.cloud where we've asked every citizen to be a part of. And in that portal is where we'll sell most products that are sold by the system. And we can do consolidated billing. When you became a citizen, you signed a teaming agreement. The reason you signed this teaming agreement and we became the project managers, meaning Freedom Nation became the project managers of the Freedom Nation and your efforts, is so that we can track these things. And the reason of tracking these things is to make sure that we grow and to make sure you grow and to make sure your business grows and make sure that you're effective and that we get where we're supposed to go. I want you just to look at some of this other stuff, like a breakdown of landscaping services. You'll see exactly how detailed the U.S. goes in to breaking down just a simple thing like landscaping services to figure out if it's doing its part to build up the society. And then there's even deeper numbers, which I'm giving you the resources, so feel free to go in here and you can look at the actual numbers as they are. Typically, the majority of the information is gathered through census, which is done on a multiple year basis, where they come back and try to pull these numbers to identify exactly how well the economy is doing, how well it's not doing, how there's growth in certain sectors, not growth in sectors. We will implement very similar concepts throughout the Freedom Plan. And the Freedom Nation has been developed as a professional organization to ensure that we stay on a proper path. But let me be clear, the ownership of these organizations, the finance that is benefited from these organizations must go back to you. We have no authoritative goals because at the Freedom Nation, if we had authoritative goal to earn this money, then it wouldn't necessarily go back into the Freedom Nation right away. It's important that the things go back to you when you agree to purchase from someone in the Freedom Nation, and then you sell to someone in the Freedom Nation, that money is circular. When you sell to someone outside the Freedom Nation, and then you still purchase within the Freedom Nation, that money increases in the circular economy, and we grow. So the plan is to ensure that we have all the proper things. I'm going to use one example of the plan. It's a segment of it in the housing segment. Now, I want you to take this $50 million a year that's coming from these 500 families in the Freedom Nation. And this is where we're going to end the video. But this $50 million a year that comes from that, the segment, once you take out the 29% of 85% that's dedicated, you have $14 million. So $14 million is spent by 500 families on an annual basis for their housing expenses, until they get to the point where they own their house outright, and then there's still some basic expenses that come there. But coming into the Freedom Nation, this is the spend for the first 10 years. Why? How do we know that? Because we're providing 10-year financing for housing materials and everything for everyone in the Freedom Nation. So this money will flow not to the Freedom Nation, but to the Freedom citizens that do this work. And when you break down this work and you understand that general contractors, based on the average percentage of labor, and I know you might have to listen to this twice, but it's okay. I'm gonna keep running through it. Based on the annual percentage, the average percentage of labor necessary to build a home, there's 4.5 million from 500 families. That means that there's a Freedom citizen that is running a general contracting business today that can commit to the Freedom Nation and ensure that they will earn this money every year for the first 10 years by facilitating these 500 families. And they should be hell-bent, or I like to say heaven-bent, to ensure that there's as many families signing up to the Freedom Nation as possible to get up to this 500 number, because you are also increasing your customers that are coming to you. And that just makes sense. This is self-preservation and self-determination at its best. And this is our economy working at its best. This is the Freedom Village economy. This is the Black economy that you can benefit from over and over and over again. And I'll show you exactly how that happens really quick. Like I said, I'm just going to give you the framework. So general contracting, 4.5, building materials, $10 million. That breaks down the structural materials, cabinetry, heating and cooling, lighting and fixtures, flooring, tiles, plumbing and electric, everything that goes into your house. Now, Freedom Nation is taking over this part so that we can finance these. We're taking on the expense and the hardship. We spent the last 7 years building up building materials. It's one of the places that we're working to then work and provide it for everyone to make it easy. It's a lot to ask one of the citizens to then put out this much energy, because as far as African Americans go, there are almost this many building material manufacturers from raw materials that are African American owned in the entirety of the United States. I know it sounds horrible, but it's real. So Prince Muhammad, general contractor, awesome brother, Freedom Nation citizen, bam, $4.5 million a year from 500 families that are trying their best to build their houses. Now Brother Prince has to deal with issues of scale. Brother Prince has to deal with issues of making sure he can take care of everybody, customer service, finances, and we as the project managers have created COSAL and Genius Co-Support Services as support structures that can then help Prince with that, so he can focus on just bringing his expertise into the Freedom Nation and delivering it to you right on ahead. We'll talk about this in a lot more detail later, but I'm just giving you the framework and I want to see it. Now at this point, I'm gonna back out a little bit and let's just talk about the housing piece. There's an output on the housing piece right there if you notice, and why? Because this 14.5 million does not stay in these hands. This money goes into three key places. One hand, it goes over here. And this is what we call the value chain. Now, the value chain is things like transportation, utilities. They don't necessarily provide the actual products or services, but they are things that are purchased when we buy the product and services. And it's how that money goes back out. Only a very small margin is retained in the company after it pays its expenses. Typically, it should be something like 25, 30% maximum. So 70% of that money has to go back out. And even with the 25, 30% that's held, that gets broken down into dividends and other things that are paid out to the owners that they in turn, as long, and we do have the commitment to buy, goes back into the system. So really nothing is lost. And no one really made a bunch of money outside the fact that they just made it for everybody else. It just keeps circling out. I need you to understand that. You got to understand that. So transportation, waste services, utilities, cloud and IT services, heavy machinery manufacturing, all of this stuff are businesses, and each one has a space. Waste management, $200,000 in waste management from all the different sectors that are being covered, because everybody has waste. The construction will have waste, we'll have other things, food preparation that has waste, and so many other things. So dealing with that, reselling it, maximizing on that is a business for somebody. $200,000 a year is one person with a truck that can make sure that they take care of the entire Freedom Nation and all the Freedom Villages in Georgia and make sure that everyone has. That's a real smart and intelligent thing to do. I know you didn't think about that, but you can definitely get into the Freedom Village and do that. The second place that things go is into the supply chain. And in the supply chain, you'll see breakdown like this. So where we're buying all these things, this goes down to PVC piping, things like heating and cooling units, electrical fixtures, and so forth and so on. And that breaks down even deeper into aluminum sheets and tubes, and all the way down to the raw material. Now, when we start to break down these little pieces and we get into the small parts of it, we might also find that there's not enough money in each one of these things to build and sustain the plants necessary to acquire this and then take it back out. So when we can't acquire that, then we can't take it back out. So we can't acquire, for example, an entire mountain to produce any kind of marble or gravel because let's just say it's $30 million, but there's only $400,000 a year, then we need to figure out how to partner with someone in order to do that. That's that 15 to 20% loss, right, that we can't control, A. And then also there's another piece of loss that we're tracking over here. That's that $14 million in estimated loss that we'll have until we get to the point where we can build enough volume. We might never want to build that volume. We might exponentially sell from our other companies to make up for this deficit of 14 million, meaning our export deficit then increases over our import deficit. Like I said, export-import deficits we'll talk about later, but there's a way to cure this loss out of the system, and it's not so bad to build good partnerships. This is why we're building Freedom Village Cargos. inside of Kazakhstan is because we want to have access to the best products at the best prices and be able to negotiate our terms directly without having restrictions when it comes to tariffs, duties, taxes, and otherwise. Kazakhstan is the Switzerland of the East, and therefore will always have the ability to work in the free trade zone where we're building Freedom Village cargoes so that we can work around, within the structure of the law, we can work around the tariffs and the duties and limitations of importing from that port of Asia back into the Freedom Villages so that we can always keep our costs down and not continuously just be giving money away. More money back in the system, the better. And here's the key place. This is the money from the resource market. Now, you heard them talk about this in the video. What is the resource market? The resource market is you and me. It's the citizens. It's the ones who work. So in labor, dividends, and payouts from those businesses, this is the money that's earned. And then guess what? Are you really that worried about someone earning a little more or a little less? No. You know why? Because that money circles back in. And when that money circles back into the economy, it then spits back out right into those 500 families. And those 500 families start the process all over again. Now, if I had just told you this without showing you other videos, I know our folks, sometimes you believe me, sometimes you don't. But I want to show you that this is the economic concept of our country. These are economic concepts of other countries, other places. These are the methods of how it works. We're just now taking a plan and we're putting it into the Freedom Nation so that you can really, really realize a space where you have self-determination and control over your life. That is part one of the Freedom Nation plan. And that is the bulk of what I have to give you as far as just the overall structure of the Freedom Plan, how it works, and how we can win. So make sure you join and you keep up with us, Voice of Freedom, putting out the Freedom Plan and pushing forward. As always, to my brothers and sisters, we love you. Assalamu alaikum, uhuru, shalom. Let's get it done. Let's make it work.